What is it about shepherding that makes a person look at the sky? Is it just that sheep are so close to the ground that a person needs an occasional change of view? Or is there more to it than that?
Abram, look to the sky.
Have you been out looking at the sky again, Abram?
And have you been standing by the tent flap watching me, Sarah?
One can learn a lot by standing by the tent flap.
Next spring, your wife Sarah will bear a son, Abraham.
And you laughed.
Yes, I did, you silly old man. Do you remember how old I was when I heard that prediction?
It was more than a prediction, my dear. It was a promise. And yes, I do remember how old you were, because I remember how old I was. And how often I would cast my eyes to the heavens, especially at night, and I would wonder at the stars.
Count the stars if you can, Abram. So will be the descendants with which I will bless you, as many as the stars of heaven.
And you believed, didn't you, Abraham? You believed.
Abraham believed, and it was counted to him as righteousness.
Yes, I believed, and you laughed.
Look at the sky and anticipate a baby? That was the essence of the Lord's promise.
Look at the sky and anticipate a baby.
It was a wonderful message, Abraham.
It still is.
Look at the sky and anticipate a baby.
A message for the ages.
I was still laughing when the baby was born.
Isaac, you named him.
Laughter.
Laughter.
Isaac, song of a shepherd.
A very old shepherd.
And his very old wife. Don't tell me you didn't laugh too, Abraham.
I guess I haven't stopped laughing, Sarah. The promise of the Lord was just so great, so beyond anything anyone could ever imagine, so impossible.
And we named him Isaac.
Laughter.
Have you been looking at the sky again? What is it about shepherding that makes you look up like that? It seems you're always looking at the sky.
Not the sky this time, my dear Sarah. This time my vision is lower than the sky. I find myself looking toward the horizon.
So you intend to do it? Even though Isaac is our only son? The only hope we have for God's great promise to come?
I have no choice, Sarah, for the Lord God has spoken.
Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. Take him to the land of Moriah, and I will show a mountain where you must sacrifice your son.
Your only son, Isaac.
Whom I love.
And I will show you a mountain.
I will lift my eyes to the hills. From whence shall come my help? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. I will lift my eyes to the hills.
And when the deed was done,
I was standing by the tent flap once again. My laughter drained from my body like moisture from the desert.
and your eyes were on the sky.
On the horizon, at least. Oh, how I dreaded what I knew I would see at last, and what I would not.
And what you saw.
Well, the servants at first, the faithful servants, and the animals beginning to become visible there on the horizon. I could count them as they began to come into view. The servants and the animals. And then you, Abraham. Yes, it was you. You were returning from the mountain of the Lord. There with the servants and the animals. The deed had been done. But wait, what is that? One more figure on the horizon. No, it can't be. One more figure. Isaac!
Abraham! Abraham!
Here I am, Lord.
Do not hurt the boy, or harm him in any way, for now I know that you have trust in the Lord, for you were willing to offer your only son.
But instead,
I received a gift that perhaps only a shepherd can appreciate.
a ram, caught by its horns in a thicket. Look up, Abraham.
The Lord himself will provide the sacrifice, I had told Isaac.
And the Lord did.
What is it about shepherding that leads a person to look up? What is it that casts one's eyes to the skies and finds there a message of a child to be?
To be a sacrifice?
No, my dear Sarah, to be restored, to be alive at last, to make laughter possible once more, to open the future to the promises of God.
Abraham, come where I lead you.
Ah, the voice of one calling like a shepherd.
Abraham, come where I lead you. The whole world will be blessed thereby.
I will follow, Lord.
Thank you, Abraham. Thank you, Sarah. In whom do you trust? In whom do you trust? Today's Advent word in the classic movement of Advent Sundays is hope. And I would make the case that a fundamental quality of hope is trust. Would you agree? We cannot hope if we do not trust in the one in whom we're hoping. The drama that Kathy and Ken offered us today showed us that this shepherding matriarch and patriarch of the faith, that to this couple, God provided both a hope and a test of their trust. The hope, of course, was that though old and beyond childbearing years, they would parent a great legacy of peoples, as numerous as the stars that we counted with the children earlier. But the test, of course, was the call for Abraham to sacrifice his and Sarah's only born child, Isaac, to God. I tell you now, if every hope comes at this price, even if it was ultimately unredeemed, if every hope comes at this price, I will have nothing of it. I would rather not hope at all if every time I hoped I had to give it up to be sacrificed to God. I'm just being real with you. Years later, John the Baptist also offered hope that the one who would come after him would redeem not only his people, but all people would be redeemed through this one. But that hope also required trust, and that trust would be put to the test. That's John's argument here. That the very people who count Abraham as their father had become a slave to sin. Read that, all of us really. And intended to deal death to both God's messenger, John himself, as well as the one who would be the very message of God, Jesus Christ. But in this latter instance, there is no ram caught in the bush to prevent this son from the ultimate and gruesome death. Again, I shake my head and wonder if hope is worth the cost of putting trust to the test. So the parallels that have been happening within our lives this past week are not lost on me. In whom do we trust? In whom does our community trust? Where do we put our hopes? Do we trust the culture of violence that allows toys to be made to look like guns? One of the most violent and final death devices known to humanity? Is that what we trust? Do we trust the police, who we pray are well trained, but they're human nonetheless, with prejudices and fears and knee-jerk reactions like the rest of us? How could they not be human like the rest of us? I would say that for many of us, our trust in hope has been put to the test in most horrific ways. Both the culture of violence that pervades our lives and our children's lives has come up tragically short. But also our trust in a judicial system that treats everyone equally, but time and time again seems like it's stacked against those who are black or Hispanic, and fails too many. Does hope really require sacrifice? My God, how many of our children have to be sacrificed before our hope in justice and peace is finally fully realized? Suddenly, I feel shoved back into my dilemma from last spring's Lent. You remember when we talked about atonement? And the story of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. The story of a baby born for a sure and certain death seems to say that this God who is love and offers grace so abundantly looks like a maniacal, bloodthirsty maniac. Well, in my dilemma, I turn to the great wealth of wisdom that helps me understand the Bible better than I possibly can. And a colleague of mine, the Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber, whom I have introduced you to before, gave me the wisdom I needed to move through this paradox. She's the pastor of Church of All Saints and Sinners in Denver, Colorado. She was interviewed by Krista Tippett on National Public Radio, the On Being program that aired this last fall. She talked about this very dilemma. These are her words. But so, if you look at Jesus, to me the greatest revelation of who God was actually at the cross. Because to me, that's not God's little boy. Like God is some sort of divine child abuser sending his son, and he only had one of them, you know. Like, come on, give me a break. You know, God's little boy, he only had one, and as this sort of divine child abuser, or as a cigar-chomping loan shark demanding his pound of flesh, you know, he's sending his little boy to the what hogwash, right? That actually is God on the cross. That's God saying, I would rather die than be in the sin-accusing business that you put me in. That from the cross, you know, there's all this stuff about final judgment. You know what the final judgment is to me? It's God dying on the cross and saying, forgive them, they know not what they do. That is an eternally valid statement to me. That is God's judgment upon us. And so to me, if God could bear that kind of suffering and only respond in forgiveness and love, that is the God who is present in a devastating hurricane, in that room with an abused child. So to me, God has come into this world and is bearing that suffering, not causing it. Those words speak my faith more than I can tell you. So here's the hope, and here's the trust, and here's the test. Yes, God promised us the world, everything, life to be lived beyond our wildest imagination. And yes, to receive this life, we have to trust that there is this ultimate goodness that is the essence of creation, this ultimate beauty that is the plan of salvation beyond what we can see in the here and the now and the news of this past week. We have to trust there is something bigger and better and greater. But the test that this created order was designed. But the test is that this created order was designed to work on its own. That is, we human beings are in charge of the course of human history. God will imbue life with this amazing grace and love and beauty, but has handed it over to us to be in charge. That's the test. So what do we know happens? Our children will die. It happens. And the justice system will fail us. It happens. And all manner of evil and pain and heartache will befall us. But here is the ultimate hope and the ultimate trust and the ultimate test of God rolled into one. God is not the cause of that suffering, but is bearing that suffering with us. Rather, God is willing to die on a cross with us. God is willing to die on the streets with us. God is willing to die on the Kudel playground with us. God is willing to die with us wherever our deaths happen, rather than to be in this sin accounting business that we so often put God into. Because you see, what we fail to realize is that God also has hopes and trusts and tests. It's not just us. God hopes in us to be the loving and grace-filled creatures that we were created to be. But God did not create us to be dolls, to be manipulated. So God has to trust us to do the right thing. But we put God to the test when we sin, when we follow our baser motives, appeal to violence and hatred and stereotypes and despair. So God did the unthinkable. God entered our very confusing and complex and sin-filled and pain-filled lives and became one of us. And not just one of us, a baby one of us. God chose to bear our suffering in the hopes that one day we would rise above the pain, that one day we would respond with forgiveness, that one day we would respond with love. It's a test that God was willing to take, to make. To see that God bears our suffering so that we might just bear the suffering of one another. Somewhere in that common bond of shared suffering, we find incarnation. God becoming flesh. Somewhere in the sharing of the pain and the possibility is Emmanuel, God with us. Somewhere in this willingness to give up the sin accounting business in order to live lives of forgiveness, give ourselves over to the love of God, we will get to know one another's hopes, learn to trust one another more, and withstand one another's testing. And then, and only then, will that day be called Christmas. Christmas. And we will know God with us. Amen. So as we bring our service to a close, I invite you to stand as you're able and sing our final